data used incorrectly, which I've seen so many times over and over and over again, can really be a business's worst nightmare.
Welcome to Real Leadership, the show that cuts through the clutter to spotlight leaders who make, move, and process things in the real economy. This isn't about buzzwords or theories. It's about bold decisions, solving challenges, and the strategies driving industries that matter. I'm Jim Weaver, CEO of the Owner Group. In every episode, we get real about what it takes to turn vision into action and obstacles into opportunities. Let's go.
Today, we're sitting down with Mark Hansricher, a guy who's walked into not one, but two companies to become their first ever chief marketing officer. The first time, Harley-Davidson. 9 years as SVP and CMO, where he helped the brand roar to #1 market share in every U.S. demographic, launching the first factory customization program and rolled out their very first electric motorcycle. The second time, Fortune Brands, where he took the marketing function to the next level across powerhouse names like Moen, Masterlock, and Therma-Tru, expanding the role all the way to global CMO and GM of direct commerce. Two companies, two first ever CMO titles, 9 years at each. That's a rare kind of track record. Before all that glory, he put in nearly a decade at GM, steering advertising for Chevy Trucks, then GMC, then Pontiac. With GM, he helped Oprah give away a whole bunch of Pontiac G6s. You get a car, that's right. He's the man behind that cultural meme that we still remember today. Going way back, he spent 7 solid years at DDB Chicago, wrangling accounts like McDonald's, General Mills, and SC Johnson. If you're my age, you probably saw some of his commercials back in the day. He's been around the block. That's more than 30 years, navigating two of the toughest categories on the planet, automotive and consumer goods. Along the way, he's picked up some hardware, 2 Canes Gold Lions, 3 Gold Effies, and a 2026 Leadership Orbie from Chicago CMO, and induction into the American Advertising Federation's Hall of Fame. These days, he's launched Richer Confidential, a coaching practice built for CMO longevity, helping creative executives stay at the top and helping those with their sights set on the C-suite get there. Welcome, Mark Hans.
Thank you, Jim. Very happy to be here.
I'm excited about this one. We haven't had a lot of CMOs out, especially CMOs with some of the recognizable, iconic moments that you've created. So this will be fun. But I want to get back. I want to get in the Wayback Machine to start. So your history as a market maker goes back to your freshman year at Northwestern. Tell us about Willie the Wildcat.
Well, it is a funny and somewhat silly origin story, but it is an origin story. So when I was a freshman at Northwestern, I decided in whatever impetus this came from, I don't know, that the world needed a better Willie the Wildcat stuffed animal. It was a big, furry, fluffy mascot, and there was a couple things you could buy on campus, but they were really terrible. They were like hard felt with like itchy, whiskers and stuff. And I don't know. I'm like, there needs to be a better one. And I got it in my head that this just needed to happen. I will tell you that I was mocked mercilessly about this in the dorm by some folks who just thought that was the dumbest distraction from a serious education you could imagine. And they were probably right to some level, but it ended up being the foundation of my whole education and my whole career because, long story short, going back to my father, I said, hey, what do you think about this? He goes, well, I don't know, but you got to come up with a business plan. You got to develop the product. You got to get a prototype. You got to find a manufacturer. You got to get, you got to get a loan. I'm not giving you the money. You don't have any money. So, he kind of mapped it all out for me and kind of put the whole picture in miniature of what business actually is, in front of me. And I just found that really exciting. And so I worked through the steps. I found a manufacturer. I got a prototype. I negotiated a licensing agreement with Northwestern University. I discovered the difference between gross and net, which I didn't know those terms, but Northwestern wanted 6% gross. And then I put that in my little, calculations. I'm like, there's no way I can afford that. So, I kind of leaned on my innocence and said, how about 3% net? And they're like, okay, whatever. It's like the best negotiation I ever had in my life. And sure enough, it all came through. I did a business plan. I went to a local bank. The first one turned me down. The second one looked at my business plan and said, okay, I think he can pull this off, and gave me $35,000 in 1986, and went and got my inventory, and I just started selling Willie the Wildcats for the next 3 years at school, and got paid back the loan early, made a little bit of money, had quality problems, had to work with my fraternity brothers to be, a sales force for me at the football games, and just, come up with segmented marketing approaches. How do you talk to alumni? How do you talk to incoming students? How do you talk to sororities? How do you talk to fraternities? And all of these are just little microcosms of what I ended up doing for the whole rest of my career. And it's ultimately the reason why I got my first job in advertising, is because that experience demonstrated that I might be the kind of guy that might be good at marketing. That's what I mean. I had no appreciable skills. I was a history major. Northwestern's a great school, so that carries some weight. But I was a history major. My father, who's a very pragmatic guy, but he didn't go to college. So he was constantly asking me, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to be a teacher? You're going to be a lawyer? You're going to be, professor? Or what do you do with this type of thing? And I was like, I don't know. I'm making it up as I go.
I do think it's unrealistic to expect young people to know what they're going to do without getting out there and doing some reps.
I tell people that all the time. And I'm not the only one. I know a lot of people advocate for that type of approach. I think it's good to know where your energy lives, like what gives you energy. Some people call it passion. I think passion is actually kind of wrong, because that can be a hobby. That can be things that just you really enjoy, but are not actual careers. I think you have to find within a career or, something that makes you money, where's the energy that feeds you. And if you follow that energy, because it gives you energy, you will also be contributing a lot of energy, and people will notice that, they'll reward that, they'll feed it. And that positive energy loop is what will turn you into a success.
So you famously told students that everything you know about business, you learned from Willie the Wildcat. So what are the foundational principles from that experience? What are the kind of those principles that you feel like were enduring that you developed back then?
Yeah. For me, just as a marketer, what I meant by that was just trying to really understand your consumer and what it is they are getting from your service or your product, and how those can be different. So you can segment those audiences, and you can speak to them differently, address them differently, create different types of experiences around those things. So as an example, beyond just doing ads on my own for the first time with no experience, I also did promotions. So I did a promotion for the sororities. It was called Win a Date with Willie. So I went and negotiated with the guy who's in the Willie the Wildcat suit, and I said, okay, well, you do this. And I did this big thing with the sororities where, they could engage on winning a date with Willie, which was kind of an emotional tie to my product and kind of fun and something to engage with, different from just posting an ad that says, hey, please buy a Willie. And so just little experiences like that taught me about what does it take to engage with audiences? How do you segment them differently? As I said, what a Willie represents to an alumni versus what a Willie represents to an incoming student. To an incoming student, Willie represents hope and dreams and attachment to the next part of your life. To an alumni, it's about reconnecting with a part of your life that you really want to remember well, and that just sparks some of those little memories. And, for a 19, 20, 21-year-old kid to sort of discover the emotional side of a physical product and how the emotions differ from segment to segment, and then how you connect with people differently. And then, of course, price points and, price ladders, because I had two different, price points with a, one product difference, which was a little song chip that played this cool song in it when you pressed it in the tail. So, that was $1 cost for $6 of margin. And you're like, okay, I'm starting to understand this price segmentation, product segmentation, the quality issues I had. It's like, okay, how do I manage through these? How do I talk to the manufacturer and sort of get them to take some of this stuff back or replace it? Just every little aspect that became the big things you end up focusing on later, I could find a nugget of it, truth somewhere in that experience.
Understanding your labor market is crucial for successful recruitment. Onin Staffing's Recruitment Strategy Guide provides insights specific to your geographic location and the positions you're hiring for. Our Recruitment Strategy Guide delivers a clear snapshot of your labor market and actionable intel to tackle market-specific challenges. With Onin's expertise, we help you navigate and win in your competitive landscape. Empower your recruiting process with the insights you need. Learn more about Onin's Recruitment Strategy Guide at oninstaffing.com/strategy. What a great experience to come out of college with, man.
Well, it's not as impressive. I mean, you got teenagers, printing millions of dollars now, starting businesses and doing stuff, and that, and all respect to them, and the hustle is great, and the energy and all that. So, so my example is a very, very small and not all that impressive one from a monetary perspective, but from an educational perspective and an experiential perspective, I guess I would encourage anyone to just get out there and just do something that you kind of feel some passion around. You're going to find some angle in it that's going to help you later, even if it isn't directly applicable.
You cut your teeth with agencies like DDB Chicago, and then you moved you moved on in your career to the client side with GM. So what was it like trying to drive creative marketing inside a massive traditional manufacturing company like GM? What was that like?
It was the greatest education in the world. And again, for me, and maybe as another sort of through line in my career, I was a history major that went into marketing, but no marketing training at all. And now I'm a guy that works in advertising, but has had no automotive experience. I hadn't worked on a car count. I didn't even own a car. Now it doesn't mean I didn't have any experience in how to motivate consumers, brands, all those kinds of things. But it wasn't a total layup. And I got lucky enough to get a job at Chevy Trucks. And when you ask that question, I think the little bit of the backstory of the question might be the assumption that, GM is a really big corporation that doesn't do a lot of great things because they're big and maybe slow and plodding or whatever. And I think that can be true at times in different eras in GM's history. But the era that I joined, they were really trying to lean in on brands. And I happened to be chosen for this job in Chevy Trucks, and Chevy Trucks really was the best marketing going probably in the whole industry. It was the Like a Rock campaign. Yeah, fantastic. And so I got a chance to work for Mac Wisner, and he was just a great, sage guy inside GM and knew how to pull levers. And I learned a lot from him and Kurt Ritter, who was the general manager of Chevrolet. And in those 2 years, that was only 2 years that I worked on Chevy, we launched the first Chevy Silverado. And I learned just so much from everybody around me. I just soaked it all in. There was some, veterans, people at, my peer level that had been there a while. And I have to say that it was more about the learning than it was me about the teaching. I was just in there just trying to figure out which end was up and how to do this well and enjoying the hell out of it. And it wasn't like, agency people, they get this thing where they think that they're going to go to the client and now they're going to be the boss, right? And they're going to tell everybody what to do. And that's going to be a real, fun thing. There's a lot of responsibility when you go to the other side and trying to understand not just how to be good at the client side, but also be a good agency partner when you've come from the agency side was another part of the big experience there. So I did find later on that as I got up in the ranks there that, yes, it is hard to move big ideas through big companies. There is no, that there shouldn't be a misconception about that. However, when you have a strong strategy and the leaders in the company understand the strategy, if you've got that alignment, there's a lot around that you can do. As long as it all kind of connects back to that, they'll give you grace to do things that might scare them. But as long as they can understand why you're doing it, what does it connect to, what strategies is fulfilling. And unfortunately, these days it's become even more about, prove the incremental ROI of that specific thing you're going to do, which I think is a little bit of a trick that is getting in business's way, because marketing doesn't work like that. If you're building a brand presence, a brand meaning, you can't slice it up that tightly to understand exactly what discrete thing did this discrete, outcome. It's very hard to do that. So, luckily GM, they were a little more, broadly reasoned than that. And enabled me to do a lot of, and our team and our agency partners, to do a lot of creative things, which some of which worked spectacularly well and some of which did not. But it wasn't for lack of trying. And as long as they understood where the heck we were trying to go with it, they were supportive, and it was a really good time.
So let's double click on that, getting support of leadership and tie that to the 2004 Oprah You Get a Car giveaway. So what were you tying back to? What was the case for that pretty outside the box aggressive marketing play?
Well, you may have remembered the positioning for Pontiac way back when was "We Build Excitement," and so there was always supposed to be an emotional component to the Pontiac brand. And when I got promoted into that role, after coming from GMC Trucks, where we launched We Are Professional Grade, which went extremely well, and it's probably my proudest moment in my career. The
professional grade.
Yeah, We Are Professional Grade was a campaign we launched in 2000, and it's still the campaign for GMC today. They were going to shut GMC down because it was struggling, and or at least they were considering it. I can't say that it was like an absolute plan, but they were very close to considering it because Chevy and GMC share the same manufacturing lines. So it was a lot more sane, for at least from the GM of Chevy's perspective, to give him all the production, because they were selling it better than GMC was. And We Are Professional Grade helped differentiate the brand away from Chevy and give GM two sort of horses in the race that could segment the market better, kind of going back to Willie the Wildcat. But in Pontiac, it was about recapturing a cultural zeitgeist for the brand. Back when the brand was really hot and cool, it was part of the culture. Think about, what it was when it had the GTO, the Firebird, Smokey and the Bandit, just they were part of music. They were part of movies. They were part of the zeitgeist of America. And Pontiac really lost that, partially because they didn't have the hot cars, but also because they didn't try as much to have the hot cars. They decided they wanted to have things like minivans and, and all this kind of stuff that really wasn't the Pontiac ethos anymore. And so when I came in, I was like, we got to figure out how to get this thing back in the zeitgeist. Even though we don't have the greatest products in the world, I adopted like the Pontiac Aztec. Okay. I adopted the Pontiac Grand Am, which at that point was just a glorified rental car that they were just dumping into rental fleets. So a little bit was, smoke and mirrors to begin, but we had a whole new product lineup coming. Like the G6 was one of them. A new GTO, a car called the G8, the Pontiac Solstice, which is just still gorgeous today. So we had a whole product line coming, and we wanted to reset the bar for what Pontiac emotionally could be. So when it came to Oprah, that might seem a little divergent from what I was describing, because I think when people think about the 60s, 70s Pontiac, they think of a very male-oriented brand. The truth is that the Grand Am sold 65% to women. And even the Firebirds sold, I think it was 55 or 60% to women. So there was a masculinity about it, but we also sold to women who were a big part of our owner base. And so there was a little bit of a false myth around this idea that we have to just go get a bunch more men. We actually needed to maintain the women and get even more higher income women to get to the price point that we needed to for especially for the midsize car segment, which is where the G6 was going to be replacing the Grand Am. And so with that, you start to map out, okay, who's in the cultural zeitgeist that gets you women of a higher income and a higher, persuasion in society and culture, and could advocate to get this this brand new name, brand new car in the most cluttered segment in all of automotive, which is midsize cars. How do you break through the clutter of all that? We don't have the most money. How do we make it exciting? So you go through all these things and, like a lot of marketers, did at the time and probably still do. It's like, hey, let's do something with Oprah. Okay, well, that's not really an idea, but it's a good instinct when you start with those first few strategic pillars and go, okay, well, what am I trying to do with Oprah? What does Oprah represent that ties to these strategies that we just talked about? And so a little bit of serendipity started to take over because the team started talking about it, and we were holding back. The team was holding back because the idea of, like, in Oprah's favorite things, you give a thing away to every single person in the audience. And the team was like, well, there's just no way we're going to be able to give cars away to everyone in the audience. So let's do 10 cars. Let's give away 10 cars. And, by the way, we had not yet talked to Oprah or anybody because we could not figure out how to do that. But this is all just theoretical. Hey, let's give away 10 cars. And I remember being in the review meeting going, guys, that's not compelling because no one's going to remember that. And the next person's going to come in and give away 50 cars. And then it's like, there's no point to that. It doesn't really achieve the objective. But it wasn't their fault. They were just naturally assuming that it's like, well, the company's not going to throw down, millions of dollars to do this. But then they came back and said, well, how about 25? We think that's a meaningful number. And I remember saying, listen, if we can't give cars away to every single person in the audience, then there is no idea here. There's nothing to do. Just find out another angle, but it isn't this one. So they came back, they ran the numbers, and they said, okay, in order to do this, we're going to need about $8 million, which it's not in our budget. We didn't have that to throw away on a promotional activity like that. So we had to go up the ladder to the VP of marketing, which is like the CMO of GM. And there's actually two guys and pitch. And I had a really strong partner named Ms. Mary Kubitsky, who had sort of brought the whole idea through and, helped nurture it and build it out and sort of figure out how this was going to work. And so she and I were in their offices, and it was it was a kind of a difficult meeting because the head of GM marketing was asking questions about, like, the ratings of daytime television. They're like, well, we're going to spend this much money on a daytime television show. And, like, what are the ratings and why? What's the reach? And for one time only? And what, are you kidding? This doesn't match any, CPM, metric that we would approve. And Mary and I were trying to convince them that no, this is like an influencer. It's just like, it's like before influencers were a thing. This is influencer marketing. This is, an investment in the belief in this car, not just hearing the name, but the trust in the fact that it's really good. And you should want to buy it if you're in that market. Okay. So it's a depth of persuasion, not just hearing the name. Although it is also hearing the name. So ultimately, they decided not to kill the idea. They said, okay, we'll think about it overnight. and we were on a short clock. By this time, we had opened up the door to Oprah. We'd had a couple positive serendipity things fall in our lap where we got an audience with Gayle King, Oprah's best friend, and then Gayle took it to Oprah. And they asked, well, would you guys really do that? And we said, well, would you really do that? And the idea turned into them not doing it in December at Favorite Things episode, but to pull it up to September to their season opening broadcast, which now meant we were on the clock really, really close. Like we were out of time. We had a yes or no. And one of the two gentlemen in the room took the idea back home and he talked to his wife, and his wife told him that he'd be an idiot if he didn't do this. And he convinced the other guy that they'd both be idiots if they didn't do it. And so they gave us the $8 million and we went off and did it. And so I guess the point of all this is that it really takes a village, so to speak, on these things. There's never one person that makes it all happen. The idea builds and breaks and then rebuilds, and there's teams involved, and there's all kinds of people that can lay claim to having a legitimately important role in making this happen. And success has many fathers, failure has none. But, legitimately, there was a lot of people who had a really important role in this being a success. And it was. So the data, which I'm sure your audience might be curious about. So brand new name in the midsize car segment would typically take 2 years to hit a certain level of awareness. We hit that awareness in 6 months. So we advanced what would have been multi-millions dollars of investment to build an awareness level over 2 years and accomplished that in a quarter of the time. We sold G6s at $5,000 a copy more than we were selling the prior Grand Am. So it was much more profitable, at least, the first couple of years out of the gate. Back when, by the way, there were no iPhones at this time. This is 2004. But in Google search results during that week of the car giveaway, because one of the critiques about this sometimes is, well, people, you get a car, but no one remembers what the car was. But in that first week, the Oprah car giveaway was like the number one search term, and the Pontiac G6 was the number 7th search term in all of the United States, not just within automotive. So we clearly got the name, the identity of the car out there, and then we built on it with other marketing efforts, and the dollars were clear and proven. Definitely had a great ROI, and nobody regretted the decision all the way up to the gentleman that I was talking to before.
Oh, that's fun. So you walked into Harley-Davidson right before the Great Recession, and that was rough timing.
Thanks for reminding me.
So from partnering with like UFC, the X Games, to connecting the brand with like Sons of Anarchy, I think you gifted Pope Francis a bike. You took Harley to entirely new cultural spaces. So how did you identify these partnerships as the right moves for the brand, moving in the direction that you guys saw the brand moving in?
For Harley, I think the key, well, first of all, they had never had a CMO before. They did, amazing marketing, but they never had the C-level type of marketing that was, sitting there in the C-suite and could bring, more than just, hey, let's do some ads to the business. So, I worked on all the strategic committees. I worked in product planning, product development. I worked very closely with engineering, and, industrial design. So this was like a 4P type of marketing role, that was really gratifying, and we could do a lot of great things. Harley was, obviously a great brand, but it was sort of associated with a particular demographic, and still is to some degree. And the key was to try to expand those demographics so the business could be broader and more sustainable. But my very strong feeling, and I think most people's strong feeling at Harley, was we can't do it by sacrificing what Harley stands for. So we're not going to paint bikes pink to, attract women. Young adults, however, we wanted to do that, and I'm not sure if that's history repeating itself right now, but there are people in Harley who were convinced that Harley didn't sell anything to young adults. And the reason why they were convinced is they believed very, very strongly that young adults only bought cheap bikes, or only bought small bikes, or only bought sport bikes. And so because we don't sell any of those, we're not the cheapest bike, we're not the fastest bike, we're not the smallest bike, then nobody buys Harleys. And my suspicion was, I bet that's not true. I bet we do sell bikes to young adults, and I sure would like to know what those bikes are. And maybe we'll find that it is only the cheap ones, or maybe we'll find that whatever. They had never run the data like that before. They'd never done sort of segmented insight on just young adults. They had been managing everything by product lines. This is the Dyna product line, the Sportster product line, the V-Rod product line, the Touring product line, the Softail product line. And so they had people waking up in the morning trying to figure out how to make the world safe for more Softails, make the world safe for more Dynas. And they were sort of competing with each other around product platforms, not about consumer sets. So I changed the mentality from product platforms into consumer sets. So now let's find out, since we want young adults so badly, what do they already buy from us? And if we can find a nugget in there, maybe we can clone it. And we found an interesting insight, which was that the young adults that were buying Harleys were not just the cheapest bikes. And our cheapest bike at that time was like $6,900. And it certainly just wasn't our fastest bikes like the V-Rod. And what we found is they liked the certain design ethos that was already embedded in some of the product lines, which is this kind of blacked out, more essential, stripped back. They didn't want chrome. They didn't want to bex on extra accessories. They wanted to feel more essential and more kind of raw, and what they would say is make true to, what a pure Harley would be, not the chrome cruiser thing. But we already had some bikes like that, just from the insight of people in our design studio who kind of liked that stuff. And so they put that stuff together and they put it out on the floor, and we were already selling it. We just never saw that pattern before. So with this insight in mind, we created a sub-brand called Dark Custom. And we created a new identity around it. We mashed up a Willie G skull that he had designed for use in other product lines, and an Evel Knievel Racing 1. And we smashed those things together. And we threw that out in the world within, 3 months of when I arrived. And took the bikes that were of that design style and put them together into this sub-brand. So it was like, it doesn't matter if it's a Softail, it's a Sportster, it's a whatever. If it has this design ethos, it's a Dark Custom. And then we just started telling more people about the fact that we had these bikes, which were very, very hard to find on the floor because they were drowning in the sea of chrome. So even if a young adult had the gumption to come into the dealership, they couldn't find the thing that they were looking for. So this is really just about getting out of our own way, capturing stuff that we already had, reframing it, packaging it a little differently in the Harley way, and then taking that identity and assigning it to cultural references that made sense. So that's where UFC came in. And at the time, if you recall, back then in 2007, 2008, John McCain was calling UFC human cockfighting. And it wasn't allowed even in some states like New York. It had been banned, and it wasn't in Vegas. It wasn't, there's just certain places that could be. And it was a pretty controversial thing for us to get into the center octagon. And we were the first major brand to get in the center octagon. The one prior to us, the one we kicked out of the center octagon, was Mickey's Big Mouth Beer.
What happened to Mickey's? Are they still around?
I don't know. It's probably still out there. It's probably still out there somewhere. It's making me want one right now. So that just shows you where they were at the time. I mean, I even talked to Dana White, who was really on top of this. Like, he really wanted this bad for UFC, and as a signal to them for UFC to say, hey, we're growing up. We've got big brands now, who want to play in this space. And sure enough, within the next year, Anheuser-Busch kicked us out and threw big money at Dana and said, hey, we really like that center octagon. and then we kind of moved to the side. But back to your question, that's what we were trying to do in certain instances based on our strategy and who we were going after. How do you culturally scale some of these focuses for these new, these expanded consumer sets that we wanted to have. And the Pope one, Pope Francis, the reason for that was we were celebrating our 110th anniversary year. And Harley every 5 years celebrates its anniversary and brings all of its customers together. But we had never done that outside of Milwaukee. It had always been, come home to Milwaukee. And in 110th anniversary, our strategy was to prove that Harley wasn't just a domestic American brand, that we can compete with any brand in the world. And we were truly a global force. And so that's the strategy. And because we wanted to grow globally, grow internationally. And so for our 110th, we decided to hold an anniversary rally somewhere else other than Milwaukee, in addition to Milwaukee. And we actually had a kind of a pitch from different cities, kind of like when, hey, do you want to have the World Cup come to your city, or, the Olympics or whatever? Like, Harley wants to bring its 110th anniversary celebration to some city in Europe. Who wants it? So we had already had really big rallies in Hamburg and Barcelona and other places. And so they were in the mix. And we just decided that we wanted to expand that and create a footprint in Rome. And the reason why we chose Rome was because we had not really had any big rallies there in the past, so that would enable us to expand on a year-to-year basis. But also because the city of Rome brought the Vatican to the table and said, well, if you come to Rome, we can open up a dialogue with you in the Vatican. And our strategy was globally epic experiences for this anniversary year. And so we couldn't think of a more globally epic experience than to partner with the Vatican. So we're like, all right, we'll take a flyer on that. And we chose Rome. And we ended up doing a deal with Pope Benedict, who was the predecessor to Pope Francis. And we're working this out with his administration. Every papal administration is a little different. I mean, there's a core, that kind of continues from place to place, or, pope to pope. But then there are people that they have to bring in. And so we did this with Pope Benedict. And then for the first time in 650 years, Pope Benedict says, you know what, I think I'm done here. And he just steps off, so we always knew that maybe he was going to die, but because that's what popes do. But he just steps off. So now we've got like, oh my God, are we still doing this thing? And Pope Francis walks in, and ultimately that ended up being the best thing that ever happened, because he was kind of like a Harley Pope. He was like, he had this kind of, let's call it badass energy. He was unafraid. He just kind of took stuff on, eye to eye. He was known as that kind of guy for a pope. And we're like, this is just great. But we didn't have a final deal with him in his administration until like a week before this thing actually went off. It was just back and forth and kind of dinners with, sometimes someone would show up and then sometimes that person wouldn't show up for 2 hours, and you're kind of feeling like this isn't going anywhere. And then they do finally show up. And I mean, it was kind of the craziest negotiation I've ever been a part of, other than maybe Oprah. But it came off like that never happened. And it was a really, really powerful cultural moment for the brand. And I got to imagine the Ducati people were really pissed when they saw it. But I was also kind of glad about that.
Man, all I think about when I think of Rome is everybody rides around those scooters. Driving a Harley in Rome would stand out, no doubt.
We had a huge parade that right through Rome, from the coast up through Rome, where the streets were all blocked off, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of riders just going right through Rome, right past the Colosseum. Right, it was extraordinary.
So thinking about these like massive cultural plays. So how do you balance the need for showing ROI versus long-term brand building? Or like how should you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, you have to think about it. It's the most important thing. That's what marketing is supposed to do. But you can't force people to buy something when maybe they're not quite in the moment. There's just no such thing as that. So you have to deal with humans where humans are. So it takes a while sometimes to consider whether you want or don't want a product category before we even get into the brand choice within that category. So let's say faucets. So I was at Moen for 9 years. The average life cycle of a purchase or life cycle purchase in, let's say, a faucet, kitchen faucet, is 7 years. So if I kind of get you excited or build trust with you that Moen's a really good brand, the return part on that investment might not come for literally years. So you have to have a line that gets people interested in the brand, that gets people to know the brand, that gets people to associate with it in ways that they trust and they like, and they're emotionally bonded to if you can get there. And then you have to have part of your marketing mix that's about, harvesting that energy when they're ready to go. And so that's just a different type of marketing mix. And that's always a marketer's, biggest challenge is what's the right balance? How do you, plant enough seeds, grow enough crops, and then harvest them well enough, and not let anyone else sort of harvest your crops for you? And that's really a 4P thing. So do you have the right products? Do you have the right distribution? Are you priced well enough? And by well enough, that doesn't mean you have to be the cheapest. It just means that you have to offer fair value for the promise that you've offered. And then, of course, are you well known enough through your promotions? And so it's a constant cooking of the meal from a marketing perspective. It's just like anything else. If you're cooking a meal, there's certain ingredients. Some things take a little longer to cook. Some things are flash cooked, and then they kind of come together in something that ends up being really tasty, hopefully. But you're not looking at each individual ingredient. You're not feeding someone the onions and going, here, eat the onions. I'm working on the chicken over here, but eat these onions now. It doesn't work like that. So yes, you have to prove ROI, and there's, what we always do is try to correlate, this metric correlates to this metric, correlates to this metric. And there's a lot of marketing things that go on in between. But if you get someone to be, very highly aware of you and then highly considered of you, those tend to correlate on very high levels to actual end purchase. And you can lose them. There's loss, there's slippage in some of those things. People can, offer a great promotion or something and kind of like steer you off or, whatever. But that's typically what the discipline really is about. And it has to be about both sides of that discipline for you to be effective as a marketer.
So you have a new coaching practice, Richer Confidential, and I understand you help creative executives be courageous. So what is, if that's accurate, I think that came from you. What does that mean?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you mentioning it. Yeah, Richer Confidential is my new executive coaching practice, and it really is focused on, close relationships with individual professionals, usually in the creative industries. So think of CMOs or wannabe CMOs or people that are in media or agency businesses where, they've been great at their creative development. They've proven themselves in all kinds of ways in their creativity. And that next level for them is about how to be a great executive, as well as continue to have and be known for that great creativity that they're, uniquely able to provide. But that is a big transition for people. And it's a scary transition for a lot of people. It's certainly something that they want, but they don't quite know how to get there. And then if they can get there, they may not know how to stay there. So when you opened up this, conversation, you talked about my history of being a 2-time 9-year CMO. So I know a little something about CMO longevity and what that takes. And at Harley, I worked for 3 different CEOs. So it wasn't like I just had this warm, fuzzy, executive situation around me that, everybody got along and everybody just nurtured each other. And then, 9 years later, it changed. 3 different CEOs, very, very different styles, different executive teams. And so I've seen a lot of things about how executives work in those situations, especially creative executives, how you work with CFOs, how do you work with COOs, CTOs, and all other, disciplines that are typically thought of as being a little more rational. That's a little bit of a false label, I think, because I think everyone has creativity within them. And they can be the best partners for a marketer if you approach it that way. So when I talk about courage, I'm trying to help people understand how to get used to being uncomfortable because they have to cross over some mental frameworks that they're not really used to, that they maybe not even believe. Like the CFO can be your best friend in developing creativity and delivering for the business. Engineering might be your most important weapon in elevating the brand. And if you're spending all your time with your marketing team, you're actually not doing the job right, at the C level. So these are things where I think courage and just emotional gumption kind of comes into play. And executive coaching is not about telling somebody what to do. It's about helping them understand for themselves, how to get past their own mental barriers or being trapped by the success of their past. And getting onto that next level of development and success, because everybody, even at the highest levels of success, really needs a coach. I mean, Tom Brady had a quarterbacks coach, his entire career. Quarterbacks come in the NFL, new quarterbacks. And everybody says it. It's like, okay, they'll be good when they learn how the game slows down. And what do they mean by that? They mean that you learn enough about the game, you understand the patterns so that you're not just throwing the ball into the defense's hands because you didn't see what that defense actually was, or you didn't see them sort of sneaking into the gap. But once you recognize those patterns, the game gets a lot easier. And it's the same thing for anyone who's developing into a C-suite type of role or senior leadership role. And I just feel a real unique passion. I don't know if it's unique, but it's certainly, a passion of mine to help people in that way, because I've seen it. I lived it. I really want to help people through it, especially creative people who I think probably need, this kind of assistance. And I'm really looking forward to, helping as many people as I can.
Recruiting top talent is tough. Onin Staffing focuses on people, offering exceptional benefits to attract and retain dedicated workers. Partner with us for flexible, data-driven solutions. Visit oninstaffing.com to learn more.
So you're notably skeptical on what you call data worship, and you talked about measuring just now and you've referred to predictive analytics as a marketer's unicorn rainbow fantasy, which is a great line. So tell us about that, and why do you believe companies are over-relying on data?
It's not so much that they over-rely on data. It's that data without context is kind of useless. And if you put the wrong context on it, such as, I need to know that if they ate those onions, that they enjoyed their meal. And I find that people eating just the onions did not enjoy the meal. And then I decide to not serve the meal because I cooked it wrong. I didn't do it the right way. I didn't do it in the right order. I decided that I only wanted to measure the onions relative to measuring the chicken, or relative to measuring the sauce, relative to measuring the ambiance, relative to measuring the price. I didn't do that. I just measured the onions. How were the onions? I hated the onions. They were terrible. Well, there's my data. I've got data now that they clearly don't like any of this stuff. So time to move on to whatever else. So data used incorrectly, which I've seen so many times over and over and over again, can really be a business's worst nightmare. And that is exacerbated now at the age of AI, because everyone has access to these AI tools. And so everyone in a business is going out and going, hey, look what I found this weekend. I created a whole new segmentation and I've got some new consumer personas that I think are awesome. And they forget that there's this thing out there called AI slop. If it's your idea, you think AI is, unassailable truth. If it isn't your idea, you might think it's all AI slop, and maybe the truth is somewhere in between, but the data isn't necessarily true. It's just more data for you to try to figure out what is the right combination of the data to get at the actual truth. And there is no easy button on data. Data it's got to have strategic context. It's got to have, competitive context. Did your sales go up because your competitor was off the shelf because they had a quality control problem? Or is it because you just put the coolest product in the world out there? Well, your data was our sales went up. What's the cause? What's the causal factor? And getting underneath the surface of that is really important to know what you're supposed to do next. So data by itself is way too comfortable for people, and it's actually should be uncomfortable. It should be the thing that you have to scrape under the surface a couple levels to get at the real truth. As far as predictive analytics, I don't think all predictive efforts are worthless. I just think the idea that you're going to push an easy button somewhere and it's just going to tell you what the world is going to be like, especially in any kind of competitive business environment where variables change all the time, it is a little bit of a fantasy. And it doesn't mean that it's not a good starting point. It might give you some feeling of, all right, this could be a very valid strategy to go in the future. But if you kind of set it and forget it from that point and think that, okay, well, 6 months from now, when I actually get in the market and do what I thought was going to happen here, that's totally going to work just like that, just like I thought it would, without continuing to measure the sub data along the way to understand if any of the conditions that you assumed at the beginning have actually changed. That's kind of a fool's errand. And it's hard work. It's hard work to do that. So, people like shortcuts. They want to have data-based arguments because they're much more compelling in the C-suite and to the board. But data doesn't exist. It's just like throwing a stone on a river. Okay, the river keeps moving. So it happened at that one moment, created a nice little ripple, but that river never stops. So you have to just keep understanding where it's going and understanding if you still have the right strategy. And so it's not to say that those efforts are wrong or bad. It's just that it's just not enough to really be good at using those kinds of tools. The last thing I'll say is in predictive, there's a whole industry emerging in the AI space, about synthetic audiences and kind of getting a scalable understanding of consumers through synthetic, basically cloning of people in sort of AI space and, querying them about, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And I think that's a really, really interesting development that I don't think is bad at all. Matter of fact, I think that it probably works more than it doesn't work. Because it helps give you scale when it's hard to get at scale at research. And so even if it's only 80% right, it's still better to have 80% right over a much bigger population of people than 8 out of 10 people in a focus group. Which, sadly enough, a lot of people make decisions off of very low sample sizes like that. And so I think that is, as far as predictive is concerned, is a really magical thing that is happening. But it's still, even in that case, still requires context, still requires measuring along the way, still requires, trial and error. And nobody has yet figured out the truth of the human heart and brain and how it changes over time and why it changes over time. These are mysterious things, and there is no business in the world that is not fed by a consumer at the end of the day. And so as much as a business can do about truly understanding who those consumers are and staying on top of that and how they're changing or not changing, that's where the winners will be. And so analytics and data, to me, can just be colder ways of trying to get at that understanding that really don't go all the way to where I think the most meaningful intersection with the consumer is. And that's why I said all those things.
Cool. That's good. That's good context. All right. Final question. We'll land it here. So I was talking with my 21-year-old son 2 days ago, and he's waiting tables this summer. He's an industrious kid. And he said he had gotten in a debate at work. And he said, "Dad, do you think the American dream is still alive?" And it's interesting. And there's some kind of unrest in that demographic. So what's your best advice to 20, 30 somethings that are reaching for the dream today?
That is a great question. I have an embarrassing admission, which is that when I was that age, I remember going to my dad and saying something really, really stupid, which was coming from that same place of insecurity, saying, "Dad, I feel like all the really great jobs have already been taken." And he's looking at me like, "What are you talking about?" And he was right to look at me that way too, but it was coming from that same place of, wow, it feels like the world's just kind of got it all figured out and it's all out there and maybe it's passed me by and I kind of missed the train. It's that it comes from that insecurity of, man, what I want is so far out there and I just don't even know if that's even possible. Like how does this even happen? And I think that's a fair insecurity that I don't blame anyone for having because it's daunting. It's like, how do you get to be what you want to be? And it's never very linear and it's never totally clear. And once you get kind of through college and you're off the kind of the treadmill of all the predictive steps you're supposed to do, now it's like wide open and scary. But as far as the American dream being a support underneath that pursuit, without being rah-rah American, because I think we have to be clear-eyed about it. I don't think there's ever been a better time to, participate in the American dream. And I don't mean that as a political statement. I just think that there is so much opportunity and continues to be. There's so many emerging industries, so much enablement through technology, still great, really robust marketplaces, and people have money and the globe continues to get healthier and wealthier. And yes, there's real problems, right? The climate is probably a problem that we're going to have to address. It's going to come with costs. And there are other things, poverty in parts of the world and other things, water quality, and all these things. These are all very real challenges. I really feel so strongly that we will solve those challenges. And actually, as part of solving those challenges, business opportunities will also come. And so there are going to be industries that you can't even predict out there right now that will be part of what someone can make a very magical career out of and be very fulfilled. And it doesn't have to be environmental. It can be anything. It can be financial, whatever. But there's going to be all of these continue to be, just as there always has been, continue to be these rich opportunities for younger people to find their way. And so if the American dream means, will I be able to make a life for myself that is fulfilling, that I can support myself and the people that I love, and we can have fulfilling lives. I absolutely 100% believe that it is as robust and rich as it's ever been. And it still takes gumption to get after it. It doesn't come naturally. It doesn't just get handed to you. You don't get a golden ticket because you happen to live in America. You still have to hustle. You still have to figure it out. You got to work. And I don't just mean punch a clock. If people even know what that means anymore, it's not just showing up. it's like, you got a job. Okay, now do more than what the job's asking you to. And then they're going to like the fact that you did that, and they're going to want to give you more responsibility. You're going to work your way into these other opportunities because of the way that you handled the work that was given to you, even if it isn't your ideal thing right away. This is the nature of the American dream. This is the Horatio Alger, thing. And I just think it's very, very real. And I really want people to believe in it, because I think that's half the battle, is you just have to believe that it's possible, because, it is.
Tell you what I experienced. The first phase, like just scraping into the middle class, was the toughest phase for me. And part of that was just, I had an unorthodox early, 20s, but man, I think that's the thing too. You don't realize that, 80% of your energy goes into the first 20% of the distance. And it does build over time.
That's a great insight. I think that might be part of the problem too, is I think a lot of young people see these kind of get rich quick things going on, and, and so they think that's, something they have to have figured out by the time they're, 28 or 30, or I got to have my first million by blank, blank, blank. And that first substantial success, it might take a little bit of wandering around, and you got to bump into a couple walls, and you got to learn a couple things in a school of hard knocks, whether you came from a great background or not. Because there are people that were given everything that I know very well. They had the best schools, best families, and they had to learn the same things. They had to knock into some walls. They had to fall down. They had to, so I think no matter where it is you're starting from, and if maybe part of the question of the American dream is it possible for someone who doesn't have that kind of natural head start, so to speak, from a wealthier type of background? Can someone still bootstrap themselves, in this new American world? I still believe that's possible. I work in an organization, or with an organization called Year Up United, and they're actually all over the country. And I work with the Chicago branch, and they're people that come from, sort of disadvantaged backgrounds that, they weren't really given too many things. They aren't able to go to college, but they are so smart and aggressive. The whole organization is about giving them the skills to be professionals and to figure out how to work their way into professional environments and develop the skills that enable them to be successful in those environments, even though they didn't go to college. And they're so eager, they're so smart, they're wonderful to be around, and they just come from every kind of background you can imagine. But they're not sitting there, depressed about what life is handed to them. They're going, all right, I'm going to figure this out. And here's this organization that wants to help me. I'm going to put myself into this. I'm going to put in the work, and I'm going to, give myself a better shot. I just think that's always been the nature of what reaching the American dream has been about.
All right, let's land it there. How can folks get in touch with you, perhaps work with you as a coach? What's the best way to connect?
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you, Jim. Appreciate that pitch. My email is mh@richerconfidential.com. My website is www.richerconfidential.com, but it is currently behind a password. That password is Richer2026. So you're happy to go look at it and check it out. But I'm basically in soft launch right now, so more than happy to talk with anybody who's interested, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. Well, thank you so much, Mark Hans. That was an interesting conversation.
Thank you, Jim. It was fun.
Folks, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, keep it real.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is powered by Onin, the staffing partner delivering real results for manufacturing, logistics, and food processing companies nationwide. To learn more, visit www.oningroup.com. Until next time, keep it real.